This special March Madness episode of The Old Man and the Three is presented by State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. When you hear those words, you can feel good knowing that. State Farm is there to help you feel supported with the coverage you need for your car, your home, and even your boats, motorcycles, RVs, and other things that matter to you. With a State Farm agent, you know someone is there to help protect your future by helping you choose the coverage you need. With so many insurance options, it feels good knowing you can find what fits you. Maybe you like to handle things in person or on the phone with your local agent, or you prefer to do it on statefarm.com or on their award-winning app. State Farm lets you do things your way. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. All right, welcome to a special March Madness live reaction episode of The Old Man and the Three presented by State Farm. All right, we just witnessed history. The UConn men's basketball team becoming the first back-to-back champions since the Florida Gators in 06-07. We're going to talk about women's college basketball as well, but I'm going to save the best for last. So let's start with the men's. The UConn men's basketball team, Danny Hurley, what he's done over the last two seasons. You know, I've seen so much stuff this past week about the culture and the identity that he's built, the accountability, the culture, all of the things that coaches talk about. You see that on the floor. You see the effort. You see the communication. You see camaraderie. You see the competitive nature from his group, and that was out in spades tonight. I thought, for me, Cam Spencer set the tone early. And look, this is going to get me going a little bit. But I recognize that college coaches don't like the transfer portal. I recognize that college coaches don't like NIL money. In fact, I believe there's been some college coaches that have retired because they didn't want to deal with these things that are happening in college basketball right now. But here's the reality. To win now in college basketball, and look, I'm not saying this is forever, and I'm not saying it hasn't happened in the past, but to win now at the highest level in college basketball, your advantage is that you have older players. There is a big difference between having a team with several rotation players that are 22, 23, sometimes 24 years old versus playing against freshmen. And UConn has an older team. They had to reload after last year. And of course, Stephon Castle, standout young player for that team, likely a very high lottery pick. But look, Cam Spencer, Newton, Clingan, these guys are older players. Zach Edey, he's an older player. You need older players in college basketball right now. And a lot of these guys, like Cam Spencer, fifth-year seniors, right? Has already transferred twice, was at Rutgers last year, came to UConn as a fifth-year senior. It's remarkable. The deeper and deeper we got into the tournament, you look at the starting lineup graphic at the start of every game, and it's like sophomore, junior, senior, graduate. This is a trend now in college basketball. Older players going to teams that have a great coach and a talent base. Those teams are going to continue to have success. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons, and this year was an exception, of course, because we got UConn and Purdue, the two best teams in the country for most of the season. But over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen so many I was 06 VCU, we've seen so many programs now. There's so much parity in college basketball, and we've seen so many programs with older players, mid-major programs, make Final Four runs because they have an older team. This is an important piece. I want to shout out Danny Hurley, and I want to shout out Nate Oates as well, the head coach at Alabama. These guys were high school basketball coaches. And of course, Danny Hurley has an incredible pedigree. His father, Bob Hurley, is a legendary coach in Jersey. And of course, his brother, Bobby, played at Duke, played in the NBA, has coached in college as well. But Danny was a high school coach in New Jersey. And he has worked his way up, took over UConn, and he's just built an outstanding program, a sustainable program, because of two things. It's because of those things I was talking about: the culture, the identity, the accountability piece, getting his guys to buy in. That's important. That's hard to do as a coach. The other thing is he has really, really good concepts. I watched their offense. They have very disciplined spacing. They have body and ball movement. Look, it's not always pretty. It's college basketball, but they run good stuff. I thought tonight, specifically in that first half, as they were, battling Edey, he got off to a hot start. But as they sort of started to take control of the game, it was really interesting to watch their pick and roll coverage on the Braden Smith, Zach Edey pick and roll. They guarded that with two defenders. They never overhelped. They stayed home on shooters. They maintained discipline defensively. They forced Smith into some tough shots. They were willing to live. They were willing to live with two-pointers beating them. And look, I think Purdue, would they shoot 5 or 6 3-pointers for the game? Something like that? 5 or 6 3-pointers? Danny Hurley came into this game with a game plan, and his guys executed it. I think here's the advantage right now in college basketball. Here's the advantage. And Nate Oates is a great example of this. This guy went out and he hired a third-party analytics consultant to essentially help him build out offensive and defensive philosophy and build out game plans. I think it was the Elite Eight game. I saw their shot chart. Everything at the rim or behind the three-point line. The advantage in college basketball right now, and college basketball seems to be a little behind high-level European basketball, a little behind the NBA. The advantage is if you can modernize your offensive and defensive concepts, you have an advantage. There should never be two guys that run to the block. And I see it still in college basketball. You have to have spacing. You have to recruit shooting. You have to recruit skill. You have to recruit smart players. And the coaches that are doing that, those are the coaches right now that have an advantage. I want to give a shout out to Zach Edey. Look, he was a force all season long. He's been a force for his career. He's improved every year. He's a dominant college player. And I will say, I thought across the board for UConn, all of their guys that played tonight, they were outmatched physically. They matched that force. There was just a competitive spirit, a pursuit of the basketball, contesting every shot. Those guys played hard. They matched that force. But Zach Edey's a force, and he's a dominant player. And we can talk a lot about what does he look like in the NBA? Has the game passed him? But the reality is he is a throwback player. He's a throwback player. Here's what I know. Will he be a great pro? I don't know. But I know he's got size. I know he's got a motor. Very clear over the last couple weeks. He harbors grudges. He holds on to things. He's got a competitive nature about him. I'm usually willing to bet on those guys. Now, the system's going to be important and all that stuff. But in the age of one and done, this guy's won 2 National Players of the Year and is one of the best college basketball players in the modern era. All right, we're going to take a quick break for a State Farm mid-roll. When you get a new car or a new home, to get the insurance help you need, Just say the jingle. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. State Farm is there with the coverage you need for your car, your home, and even boats, motorcycles, RVs, and other things that matter to you. With State Farm, you have options to fit your unique needs, which means you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need, have coverage options to protect things you value most, find a claim right on the State Farm mobile app, or reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. So when you need help protecting the things that matter most, remember to say, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. All right, we're back. I'm going to get to the women's college basketball discussion here in a second. I just want to say one thing, though. I just want to say one thing, and that is going back to the transfer portal and the NIL stuff. I think anybody who has followed me probably for the last, 8 to 10 years, as soon as I had a podcast, I think one of the first people I wanted to have on was Jay Billis, and we talked about the idea of NIL. We talked about the idea of players getting paid. And I just want to point out that we can't live in a system for everyone that complains about what's going on with players in college. Can't live in a system where we're going to be hypocrites and say, well, it's okay. It's okay for coaches with years left on their contract to go to greener pastures. And once one of them does, well, of course, someone else has got to leave another school, and then someone else has got to leave it. We saw it with Calipari. That was a chain reaction to get Calipari, who I believe had $33 million left on his deal, on his contract, to go to Arkansas. All right, we can't complain about players moving around and not say anything about the coaches. All right. The NCAA stopped being an amateur business. It stopped being an amateur sport years ago. So I love what's happening. Yeah, is this the early stages? Is there going to be some level of regulation, some level of oversight from the NCAA and the conferences and the schools? Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully we can get this figured out so that the coaches aren't in the middle of the NCAA tournament and having to recruit kids in the transfer portal. They can just focus on trying to win the next game in the tournament. Yeah, hopefully we see small changes that makes the system better. But I love what's happening. I love that players have the freedom and have some level of power now. You're probably not surprised at that. All right, women's. How about last night? Yesterday afternoon, I should say. 18.7 million viewers. This was after the Caitlin Clark Elite Eight game that drew over 12, the Final Four game against UConn that drew over 14 million viewers. It's interesting. I think over the years, it wasn't that long ago that the NCAA women's tournament was not completely televised, that all the games weren't televised. It's amazing what happens when you treat a great product like a premium product, when you invest in the broadcasts, when you invest in the studio shows, when you invest in the coverage, when you invest in the marketing around it, right? Look, I'll be honest, when I was growing up, people talked about filling out a bracket. You filled out a men's college basketball bracket. All right, that is no longer the case. You fill out both. So I love what I've seen, the growth of the game, not just the growth of the game, but the actual game itself. It's entertaining. It's dramatic. There's main characters you want to root for. It's competitive. It's beautiful basketball. And what this generation of women's college players, and let's acknowledge the Diana Taurasi's, let's acknowledge the Maya Moores, let's acknowledge the Breanna Stewarts, the Shamiqua Holdsclaws, right? Let's acknowledge all of them. They help build the foundation for where we are right now in the women's game. And it's beautiful. I know I mentioned the studio shows and the broadcast. I got to give a shout out to Ryan Rucco, Rebecca Lobo, Holly Rowe on the game broadcast. Just a phenomenal job in all these big moments in calling the game. And of course, Andrea Chene, by the way, Aaliyah Boston, who made some guest appearances, former USC star and current Indiana Fever reigning WNBA Rookie of the Year. She's got a future if she wants it. She's phenomenal. But that studio show was so entertaining. I want to acknowledge and celebrate greatness. We try to do that as much as possible on this podcast. And the stars of the women's game, both in college and in the pros and some soon-to-be future pros here in the next week, I love watching you play basketball. I'm so grateful I get to watch you play basketball. I know Caitlin Clark has got a lot of headlines, but look, University of South Carolina and Dawn Staley, that was a dominant season, a dominant performance in that championship game. Dawn Staley is the GOAT. I appreciate so much her comments afterwards on Caitlin Clark. GOATs recognizing GOATs, celebrating greatness versus creating discourse and divisiveness. I love it. I want to do our custom State Farm segment right now. It's time for the State Farm segment. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. This is the good neighbor segment of the show. Listen, there's a lot to say when buying a new home or car, but only one thing to say: they can help you protect them. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. And just like that, State Farm is there to help you choose the coverage you need. I want to shout out two good neighbors in the Final Four. I mentioned Cam Spencer. Love him. Just love his competitiveness. A huge, huge piece for UConn winning their second straight national championship. If I'm an NBA team, I'm serious. If I'm an NBA team, I don't know if this kid get drafted, but I'm certainly giving him a look in Summer League, and I'm certainly giving him a look in training camp. Love his competitive nature. And, of course, I want to shout out another good neighbor, Raven Johnson. Her defense in the championship game against Caitlin Clark, absolutely phenomenal. Dawn Staley with a great game plan. And, look, Caitlin Clark had a phenomenal game per usual, but Raven Johnson made it tough on Caitlin Clark. When you have questions on coverage options, your State Farm agent is there to help on the phone or in person. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Guys, as always, appreciate you tuning in. This special episode, this special live segment of the Old Man and Three has been brought to you by State Farm. Appreciate those guys at State Farm, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks again to our partners, State Farm, and always remember those words that make you feel good. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.